It's been exactly as advertised. He was going to hit the ground running. He had 4 years of thinking about the possibility of getting back into this position. He made promises along the way. He was much more ready. He came roaring in. Sure, some of it is going to be off-putting because he is reactionary. He is explosive. He is unpredictable. Those were many of the reasons that people aligned with this president.
What you don't do is disappear somebody and then use deportation as a way to crack down on their speech rights. That is just a purely, I don't know how else to put it, but a purely authoritarian move whose intention is to chill any kind of pro-Palestinian advocacy that this administration opposes.
By preventing these situations from ever happening, we actually prevent the negative cascading consequences, and you reduce that incident, but you reduce further down line other retaliatory type crimes.
Those were sounds of some of the thinkers and community members who we speak to each and every day here on the Metro. I'm Robin Vincent. President Trump has a combative history with the press. We know he likes to call the news media the enemy of the people and fake news. Those words have had impact. In 2020, American journalists faced a significant increase in attacks, especially during the Black Lives Matter protests. At least 400 press freedom violations were reported, including physical assaults, arrests, and damage to equipment. That's according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. It said a large number of those incidents were attributed to law enforcement. During the campaign trail in 2024, Trump continued his rhetoric. He told a crowd in Pennsylvania, quote, "To get to me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. I don't mind that so much." Trump also has banned reporters from his press conferences. He's selective about which media outlets he'll speak to. And he's filed multiple lawsuits accusing media companies of some type of misconduct against him. Now Trump is taking aim at NPR and PBS.
Would you be interested in defunding and taking away taxpayer dollars to NPR and PBS?
Well, I would love to do that. I think it's very unfair. It's been very biased for the whole group. I mean, a whole group of them. And frankly, there's plenty of, look at all the media you have right now. There's plenty of coverage. I was from a different age, and they spend more money than any other network of its type ever conceived.
Last month, NPR reported the Trump administration plans to request that Congress cut funding from NPR and PBS, or public media, which means news and information that's not for profit and relies on funding from listeners, sponsorships, and the government. To talk more about this, NPR media correspondent David Folkenflik joins us now. David, welcome to the program.
Hey, Robin. Thanks. It's a pleasure to join you.
So first, I'm wondering, how have Trump's attacks on the press that I mentioned affected Americans' perception of the press? How much trust do Americans have right now in the news media?
Sure, I would say it's probably at or nearing all-time lows. It's been a heavily politicized reaction to the idea of trust in the press, driven by decades of criticism, particularly but not solely from the right. But Trump has made it a core part of his appeal. The idea that, there are these shadowy forces who are, he calls it deep state in terms of figures in government who oppose what he wanted to do in his first term, but that the press is part of that. And, the press is not perfect. The press is fallible. The press is mortal, and press is not monolithic. But he can point to any shortcoming, any perceived shortcoming, anything he doesn't like as somehow a mortal and venal sin that is intended to be a blow against him, and he would argue a blow against, therefore, his supporters. And so you've seen support among conservatives and Republicans in particular go way down to truly low levels in a way that, major broadcasters, which is what NPR is, it's what WDET is on a more local and regional level, but it's what, the major traditional networks have been. They see themselves as trying to reach all Americans, and it is, it is a real problem for them as they try to keep faith and hold the president accountable in this turbulent moment.
Now, David, to that end, the White House plans to send a request to Congress to strip over $1.1 billion of funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's what funds NPR and PBS and local affiliates like WDET. Congress reconvened from recess on Monday. Do you have any updates on that request?
Well, it's very interesting. And let me first say, NPR pays my salary, and I am the NPR's guy who covers this stuff. But I don't speak for NPR corporately. They have another separate folks to do it. Sometimes they love what I write. Sometimes it's frustrating to them. But I try to play it straight for our audiences because they will know that even in tough moments when it's about us, we're going to report the news straight. To that end, we're in touch with folks on Capitol Hill and reporting on all this. And so far, what the sound we're getting back is they don't know when this request is going to show up. There's signs now that it may be as late as June next month, and that they'll have 45 days to decide what to do. This is called a rescission. It's highly unusual. What it does is it's a formal request for Congress to rescind money that it is already allocated. Congress has already approved, just to be clear, a little over $1.1 billion that will go out for the fiscal years of 2026 and 2027. That hasn't happened yet, but it approves that, and it does that on a 2-year cycle in advance, in part to insulate public broadcasters from political pressures despite receiving some taxpayer funds. Well, that's precisely what you're seeing in this moment. About 3/4 of the money that's given to public broadcasting goes to television and 1/4 to radio. Most of that goes to be clear, to the stations and not directly to NPR or PBS. But PBS receives about 15% of its funding directly from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that is federal taxpayer dollars. NPR receives about 1% and a few extra percent indirectly because money comes back to us from local stations, which themselves receive about 10% from federal funds. It's a lot of numbers being thrown out there, basically saying these are key components of how the financing works for the system. So basically what you're saying here is that it is local NPR stations who will be hit hardest by this, but also this means that NPR more broadly and NPR's listeners will feel the effects of this, because we know that NPR relies on a lot of the local reporting that stations like WDET and many others do. If this funding goes away, it would have big impacts for us here in Detroit, but in rural areas, this kind of funding can altogether make or break a station. Could you talk about that? Sure. I mean, I see 3 effects, and you heard the heads of PBS and NPR talk about this during testimony last month, I believe it was, on Capitol Hill. But you're hearing station managers talk about it amongst themselves, and to me when I call, there is the real possibility that smaller stations may have to fold and will not be able to operate. I want to be just very honest about that. This is particularly true in rural areas. There are stations that serve underserved populations that are affiliated with African American audiences, the Spanish language stations. Some stations serve Native American audiences, and these are stations which may not have strong corporate or private funding bases to draw upon year after year to enhance as much on the public dollars that they receive. So those are in threat. Also, let's be clear, public media is one of the stalwarts against what you're seeing an increasing level of what are called news deserts. Yep. That is, places where you don't see local coverage. Local coverage is really expensive. I'm sure you talk about that to your audiences during pledge drives and in other, electronic missives asking for support. But local coverage could be something that's really curtailed or dispensed with. It's easier in some ways, although it costs real money for stations to pay for NPR for the right to broadcast our big news magazines. It's more efficient to spend those dollars in some ways on the national programming that cover hours and hours of time than to hire a ton of people to do it locally. That local reporting is in some ways the most expensive, per person, per dollar, per minute expense that local stations have. And so that could significantly be imperiled. And, I think I've covered media since almost 25 years now, just a month shy of 25 years. Kind of crazy to say out loud, right? But it's not the case that you can simply get local news coverage wherever you go. You're seeing newspapers really being hammered by the finances and changes of the way in which people consume news, information, and advertising in the modern moment, and seek out different kinds of content beyond news that take them away from conventional news outlets. Traditionally, newspapers were the engines and horsepower that drove local news coverage. That's not always the case anymore. Right. And so I think if that stuff goes away, that's really a problem. And I think you're going to see both if that goes away, a weakening of NPR and PBS finances, and even of music stations having the right to pay for music is an extraordinarily expensive thing that CPB helps to arrange and to make less expensive. And that stuff could go away. And let's say one other thing. You hear on the Hill a lot, people say there are alternatives, and there are. There are a lot of different choices people have. And people say, hey, places like Sesame Street could cut corporate deals and stay alive. Well, Sesame Street did cut a deal with HBO when essentially public funding for it evaporated. And it got tens of millions of dollars a year from HBO. And under HBO's new ownership at Warner Brothers Discovery, they did away essentially with that deal. There's a little bit of a subsidy there, but Sesame Street hasn't been able to find a new corporate backer to help sustain it, even on behalf of public television stations. And it's had to do significant layoffs, and it's not clear how it's going to dig itself out of this. So the idea that simply the free market is this elixir that will resolve all these issues, resolve questions of quality children's programming, resolve questions of non-commercial musical offerings, resolve the question of local news.
David, I want to hop in here because we're running out of time. I mean, what you're saying right now is that this is going to disproportionately affect vulnerable communities. It's going to affect folks who are not getting news and information from other places and are really reliant on NPR and PBS programming. Now, I want to look at NPR President Catherine Marr, who's been on a media tour to advocate for public media to keep its funding. She recently spoke with Jordan Klepper on The Daily Show.
I think the big misconception is that this money goes to NPR or to PBS. The reality is that the vast majority of funds in public broadcasting resources go directly to local stations. So I'm talking about, I think it's WMUK, WKAR, or the stations where you grew up.
Kalamazoo, Michigan.
There
yes,
you
exactly.
go.
Yes,
exactly.
WMUK. Indeed.
And so stations like that, they get a significant part of their funding comes from public funds, and that really matters.
David, in the last 10 seconds or so that we have here, how is her campaign going to retain funding?
I think we're going to see what happens on the Hill. If the president does, as promised, send this request to strip public broadcasting of all this money, she and Paula Kerger, the head of PBS, and others have been trying to work, not only members of the House of Representatives, but the Senate side. It's not 100% clear folks will go along with the president, but, we're in these strange times where things that were thought inconceivable before are often materializing. So we'll be here to cover it.
David Folkenflik is a media correspondent for NPR. David, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
The Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and Tia Graham. The show is produced by Sam Corey, Kerry Jr. II, and Jack Philbrand. Our senior producer is David Lyons. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music and creative audio production by Sam Bobia. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.